In October 2025, Dr. Now died. At least that's what half the internet was convinced of. After some AI-generated breaking news posts spread like wildfire, tribute pages, and even a few news sites were all reporting that the toughest doctor on television was gone. My 600-Pound Life fans lost it. Comment sections turned into eulogies. People who'd never met him were posting like they'd lost a family member. But there was just one problem. Nobody had actually checked with Dr. Now.
There are some people that are making some posts on social media that I have passed away. Well, this is false, and it is not something that you should believe.
So the 81-year-old no-nonsense doctor did exactly what he's famous for, and gently but firmly shut down the rumor himself. That's Dr. Now for you. But it got me thinking, what do we really know about Dr. Now? He's the most quotable doctor on television.
Do you look like you're malnourished?
And has a knack for pushing patients to tears.
I do need help.
Okay, do you think I'm stupid? I don't understand that when you
send me back home. Send me back home. No, I'm not about to do this.
But what's his story? Where did he come from? And how did he become the face of My 600-Pound Life in the first place? The man behind the doctor. Everyone knows him as Dr. Now, but his real name is actually Yunan Navzaradan. Good luck pronouncing it on your first try. He was born in Tehran, Iran in 1944. And because of that, almost every fan assumes he's Persian. But he's actually Assyrian, from the ancient Christian minority in the Middle East that predates Iran itself by thousands of years. Dr. Now earned his medical degree from the University of Tehran in 1970, then left Iran for the United States almost immediately. Over the next 5 years, he tried in 3 different cities before finally landing in Houston in 1976 to study heart and chest surgery at the Texas Heart Institute. He was personally recruited by Denton Cooley, one of the most legendary heart surgeons alive at the time. By the time he opened his own practice, his resume was already stacked. He was a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and one of the early adopters of laparoscopic surgery. His training had crossed into cardiology, general surgery, and even plastic surgery. Along the way, he got married and started a family. He and his wife had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. But his marriage wouldn't last. To the outside world, he was just another respected Houston surgeon with a growing practice and a fairly ordinary life outside the operating room. But inside the operating room, a pattern was starting to form. Morbidly obese patients kept finding their way to him. These were patients other surgeons had turned away as too risky. Eventually, he leaned into the pattern and made it his specialty. As he'd later put it himself, most other surgeons avoided operating on morbidly obese patients for a reason. The risk of fatal complications during surgery were sky high. They were expensive to treat, hard to insure, and slow to recover. Dr. Now took them anyway. As he'd later put it, these were the people that needed the most help. It was an early preview of what would define the rest of his career, years before My 600-Pound Life. But what you don't know is that My 600-Pound Life wasn't exactly his first rodeo. Camera ready. How does an ordinary Houston surgeon end up with his own TV show in the first place? The answer starts closer to home than you'd expect. His son Jonathan Navzaradan co-founded a production company called Megalomedia back in 2003. Megalomedia's early work was a handful of one-off documentaries about extreme weight loss. They needed a surgeon for those films, specifically one willing to operate on morbidly obese patients. Jonathan didn't have to look far. His dad fit that description. The first of those documentaries was called Half-Ton Mum.
1, 2, 3.
Great.
Renee Williams hopes her story might change those statistics. At a massive 64 stone, she is the world's heaviest woman.
Wow, that's the biggest one I've ever seen.
I just need help.
For Renee's daughters, this is the last chance of getting their mum back.
I don't have my mom with me right now. It scares me just a little bit.
Premiering in 2008, Half-Ton Mum featured Renee Williams, an 841-pound woman from Austin who'd been turned away by every doctor she'd seen. At the time, she was reported as one of the heaviest patients ever to undergo gastric bypass surgery. The operation itself was successful, but 2 weeks later, Renee suffered a massive heart attack and died. She was only 29 years old. Half-Ton Mum was followed by Half-Ton Dad and Half-Ton Teen, part of a documentary anthology series called Body Shock. Each film found Dr. Now in the same role, the surgeon willing to take the case that everyone else had turned down.
Hey, Dr. Sarton.
Billy did good. He just have a little discomfort. Usually is not much of pain. That's just Billy. A little pain is a lot of pain for him.
Sir. Well, you got his ticket figured out, don't you?
Yeah.
After the Half-Ton documentaries aired, it was Dr. Now himself who pitched the idea of turning it into a full series. A father starred in front of the camera while his son ran the show behind it. For 7 years, Megalomedia followed patient after patient, refining the idea before the format finally came together. Then on February 1st, 2012, My 600 Pound Life premiered on TLC.
Her whole life, Melissa's been kind of heavy. It just seemed like it escalated and kept getting bigger and more and more.
The last time I weighed myself, I weighed 337 pounds, and I thought to myself, that's not big, that's not bad at all. And then I went to a doctor, and when I stepped on the scales, and it said 645, I started crying right then and there.
13 seasons later, it had turned Dr. Now into a household name. But the fame was never really the point. What mattered to Dr. Now was giving these patients a second shot at life. And he used the same method for almost every patient.
Qualify for weight loss surgery, you're gonna have to make a change in your life. I want you to lose 40 pounds over the next 2 months. From this point on, every day, make adjustment in your eating habit. Eat healthy food, no snacking between the meal. This is not gonna be easy to make the changes, but you can do it.
From the start, every patient was placed on a 1,200-calorie diet, high protein, low carb, no snacks diet plan. And before he'll even discuss surgery, he demands they lose between 20 and 40 pounds in the first 30 days. Then keep hitting new targets every month after that. It sounds cruel, but it isn't random. Losing weight beforehand shrinks the liver, which makes the surgery itself safer. And it tells him something just as important: whether a patient can actually follow the lifelong changes that come after the operation. To him, obesity isn't a character flaw. It's a disease, one that usually comes wrapped in food addiction, trauma, and family members who enable it without even realizing they're doing it. And he never sugarcoats any of it. Not for the cameras, not for anyone.
If you have a medical emergency, we'll treat you. But I hope you wake up before that happens, because we may not be able to do anything to help you to save your life at that point. There's no hope for you. You're gonna kill yourself young.
Okay.
Do me a favor.
Yes, sir.
Delete that freaking app, okay?
And that refusal to soften the message is exactly what turned the surgeon into a meme. It's not what he says, it's the flat, unimpressed look on his face while he says it. His funny one-liners, shutting down patients' excuses, spread everywhere on social media. Today, he's got 1.4 million Instagram followers, a Cameo page, and even his own merch. He turned the philosophy into 2 books, and one of those titles became his signature line: "The scale does not lie, people do." But does his tough love actually work on people carrying years of trauma and food addiction? Before I get to whether tough love actually works, here's a little tough love of my own. If you've been watching my videos and you're still not subscribed yet, don't come crying to me when you miss the next one. Also, take a sec and give this video a hype. It really goes a long way to help this channel grow. The Standouts. For many patients, tough love did more than just work. It saved their lives. And for a few, it totally transformed how they took care of their bodies too. To understand why patients stick with him through the diet, the deadlines, and the blunt honesty, you have to look at Melissa Morris, the very first patient to ever appear on My 600 Pound Life back in 2012.
The hardest thing about being in public at my weight is you get lots of looks. And some are sympathetic, some are, oh, you dirty waste.
When you get bigger, you just get a bigger damn wagon.
Think what you want in your head. Whisper to what you want with somebody who's with you. But to say it out loud is the worst. The only thing I want to do is just fall into a deep hole.
Melissa walked in at around 650 pounds. After gastric bypass surgery, she lost nearly 500 pounds, eventually reaching about 157 at her lowest. At her heaviest, doctors had told her getting pregnant might not be possible at all. After the surgery, that changed. She had the children she once thought she'd never get to have.
Found out that I'm pregnant with our 3rd child. And I'm really happy about this, but I don't know how I feel about being a mother at 40. But then there's that whole part of me that remembers the fear of not being a mom at all.
In fact, Melissa believed in the program so much that years later she went to work at Dr. Now's own clinic, helping other patients navigate the same process she once went through.
Hi everybody, my name is Melissa Morris. Dr. Nassardin did my surgery. This is my before picture. This is my skirt. 4 yards of material. There is not one piece of chicken, not one potato chip that feels as good as this does. I can't believe now that I'm doing what I do. I get this natural high. I can feel it right here in my chest, and I can't believe how blessed I am.
Then there's Christina Phillips, one of the youngest patients the show ever featured.
It's hard because of my weight. Just simple walking from the living room to the bedroom, I'm out of breath. I feel like my knees are gonna collapse. I'm trapped inside this body that I don't wanna be in. I can't go out anymore. I can't even drive anymore. I never thought I'd get this big.
She appeared at just 22 years old, weighing 708 pounds, and hadn't left her house in 2 years. By the time Dr. Now was through with her, she lost over 650 pounds and remains one of the most dramatic transformations in the show's history.
It's been 2 years since I had weight loss surgery, and I would have never imagined life could be so great. I've gained a whole new independence, and I finally moved out from my family's house.
And really, these two success stories just scratch the surface. Check out my Transformations and Redemptions playlist for more incredible and jaw-dropping transformations. Unfortunately, as you well know, not every patient's story ends that way. The Tragedies and the Backlash.
Rob's heart was so big that his body couldn't contain it. I used to tell him that all the time. I said, the reason you're a big guy is because you have too much love for everybody. It doesn't fit your heart. I keep telling myself this has to be a really bad dream. And it's just not. It's reality.
Robert Buchel was the first patient to die during filming. He'd already lost 340 pounds when he suffered a heart attack in November 2017 at just 41 years old. And he wasn't the last.
Sean Milligan, who appeared on TLC's My 600-Pound Life, has died.
In total, 25 former patients from My 600-Pound Life have died since appearing on the show, including several in the last 18 months alone. But one of those deaths became notable for another reason. My 600-Pound Life fans loved James L.B. Bonner instantly for his calm, upbeat attitude. He'd lost a leg in a quad bike accident years earlier, which resulted in depression and a severe food addiction. But he never used the missing leg or anything else as an excuse. LB didn't just hit Dr. Now's targets, he blew past them, losing 316 pounds during filming alone.
I'm exhausted, but that was awesome. I never thought I'd be able to do that again. A year ago, I was living in my parents' garage, over 600 pounds and hardly ever leaving the couch. But I'm amazed at how much my life has changed for the better.
On camera and online, he looked like proof that the method worked, no matter the starting point. But then in 2018, at just 30 years old, he took his own life. 2 years later, his family filed the very first lawsuit against Megalomedia over his death. It was the case that opened the floodgates for everything that came next. Over the following months, 9 more former patients came forward with lawsuits of their own, which would eventually be consolidated into one major lawsuit. They claimed producers pushed them to overeat on camera, left them with unpaid medical bills, and gave them little to no real mental health support. I covered the entire lawsuit, who sued, the allegations, and how it all went down in the end, in another video. It's a wild story, so watch that one next. Link is in the description. To date, no lawsuit has ever found Dr. Now to be personally liable for anything. As of 2026, he's still one of the only surgeons in the country willing to operate on high-risk patients over 600 pounds. But the show that made him a household name isn't guaranteed to survive. Since the last episode of My 600-Pound Life aired in February 2025, no new season has been confirmed. But do you think that's going to stop the toughest truth-telling doctor on TV? No signs of slowing down. You'd think after all this, an 80-year-old doctor might finally hang up his stethoscope and retire. But Dr. Now shows no signs of slowing down. In 2025, with his flagship show's future hanging in limbo, the 6,000-Pound Diaries with Dr. Now premiered on Lifetime.
It'll be like a new life.
The 6,000-Pound Diaries with Dr. Now. New episode Monday, May 26th at 10, only on Lifetime.
How does it compare to My 600-Pound Life? I did a side-by-side comparison in another video, and I'll drop that link in the description too. Dr. Now doesn't seem like a man planning his exit. Off camera though, he's almost unrecognizable from the serious man patients see in his office. Reportedly, he plays guitar and chess. He builds Lego sets. He also paints and even sells some of his pieces. And at home, he keeps 3 small white Maltese dogs. So who is the mysterious Dr. Now really? Strip away the reality TV layer, and what's left is a surgeon who built an entire career on helping the patients that no one else would. That choice made him famous. It also made him a target for lawsuits and criticism he still hasn't fully shaken. Whether you see him as a saint or a villain, well, that's up to you. Let me know what you think in the comments, and then watch one of these next.